Hey guys, Mr. V over here, doing a book review today for The True Story of Titanic Thompson by Kevin Cook. Now, this is a biography about the guy named Titanic Thompson, and this guy is a guy who bet on absolutely everything. Before I do my review, I want you to know that I'm not a gambler. I played poker many years ago, but that was all I did. I never did any other types of forms of gambling. But I always find the gambling world very interesting, and I enjoy hearing gambling stories because they can be very interesting. They can be good or bad depending on what perspective you're taking. But the gambling world is definitely interesting to me just because of how much money is going on in the gambling world and just what happens in the gambling world. So when I heard about this book, I thought this would be a fun book, and I am glad that I read it because it was a very entertaining read. As I said, I had never heard of this guy, Titanic Thompson, his biography, but he was a guy who bet on everything from like the 1920s through the 1960s, but a lot of it in the 1920s through 1950s. And he just did a lot of gambling in that time, and he was a big-time gambler. He gambled with cards, with dice, playing pool, bowling, golf. He just did anything. But he would also do these like weird side bets. And he would also do some like just crazy, like ridiculous side bets. And some of them were just weird, as in like when he's playing pool, can he jump over the table? Or when he's playing golf, how many putts in a row can he make on top of playing the game? Or he would gamble on amount like the distance between two towns, and he just did a whole bunch of crazy things like that. Even how many melons were on a delivery truck. And again, he just had so many different times that he would be gambling, but one of the biggest things about Titanic Thompson was many times he was actually hustling. It wasn't just gambling, but he was hustling. And a few examples are like when I said he would gamble on the location between towns, what he would do is like 3 days before, he would go and move the sign a little bit closer and then gamble on the distance. Or he would talk to the delivery man to see what was being carried. And then when the delivery man rolls in town, he would bet somebody about what's in the truck or how many things are in the truck type of thing. Or he'd pay different caddies off to go and change something on the golf course. And, he just did a lot of things like that. So many times he was hustling. And that's also what made this book very interesting. And there are so many stories throughout the book because he bet on so many different things. You heard some of the things, but I'm not even covering like 10% of what he bet on, but he just bet on so many different things. And the book was really cool because it would explain what was a hustle versus what was pure skill. And sometimes he would bet on something like, can he throw a card a certain way? But he would just be throwing the card, practicing for hours, and then he would do it. Whereas other times it was a hustle. Like he just, as I said, he would pay somebody off to do something. So it was very entertaining when reading the stories. And this book covers basically from his early life until death. And from the beginning, you can see that Titanic Thompson, he was a gambler. From the time, he was born in the early 1900s, I think. From the time he was like 10 years old, he was gambling, but he was like marking cards a certain secret way so he could like win gambles, and he was doing things like that. And he was just a gambler from the time he was a little kid. And he left his mom's house when he was in his teens and then just lived the life of a gambler and many times hustler for the rest of his life. And what's interesting about this is that he would just do the same hustle, but like in different towns. And the book explains how it is not like today. Obviously this is the 1920s, the 30s, and 40s. There was no internet, obviously, but the phone was also very limited. So the word of mouth spread very slowly. So a lot of people didn't know who he was when he came to town, and he would start making these bets with people. And that is why the same hustles kept working in the next town. And you'll be surprised about how much money some people are willing to bet on some of these crazy gambles. And he just kept doing that throughout his life. His name got to be known after a while, but even then he had to figure out a new hustle, a new trick. What would he gamble on then? And the author just does a great job of explaining it, but he also does a great job of like setting the time because he explains what life was like in the 1920s and describes like other big time events that happened in the 1920s. And what he'll do is he will like devote multiple pages to some event. And even though it's a quick summary, he devotes multiple pages to some event, so you learn about some of those events. An example being, like, he describes, like, the 1919 World Series where the team threw the game, and they threw the World Series so that certain gamblers could make more money. But he also described what, like, Prohibition was like, the Mafia uprising, people like Al Capone, because Titanic Thompson played with him a few times on different hustles. So the author really just shows all these different events that are going on, and you really get a good feel for what it was like in that time period. And it is just because the author does a great job of explaining that, because it just makes it a very easy read, and he makes it very entertaining. Because you can explain those things and not be entertaining, but the author makes it entertaining because there was always a new hustle. So it's always fun reading about what is the next hustle. What is Titanic Thompson going to do? And then you just learn about the shady world of hustlers. And some of them were just pure hustles, whereas others were skill-based, but others were sometimes just mathematical, and the other people didn't know about those odds. And one of my favorites, I even looked up, I didn't even believe it until I looked it up, but you guys should look it up. My favorite being the birthday paradox. Is that one is just super crazy. If you guys get a chance, look that one up, because that one is a crazy one. Now, if you are considering this book, just be prepared for a few things. One is that the chapters can be a little long. It's not super long, but each chapter, I think in the audio version, was about 40 minutes. So, you want to be prepared to at least finish the chapter. You don't have to, but you want to be prepared for just there being longer chapters. And another thing, this is my own personal opinion. It has nothing to do with the book per se, but I felt that some parts may be exaggerated. Again, that's just my personal opinion. But the only reason I feel some may be exaggerated, and you'll see it if you read it, is that these were like word-of-mouth stories. This book was published in 2010. So Titanic passed away in the 1970s, and he had done things for like Sports Illustrated and things like that. But a lot of the stuff that he even said was all word-of-mouth stories. The other gamblers he beat were all word-of-mouth stories, and some of them were said 50 or 60 years later. And we know that things can sometimes become overly exaggerated during that time. But there was also, the reason I felt that is some things were a little tough to believe on everything, because some things were a little too far-stretching in my opinion. Maybe it really happened and I'm just being too optimistic or pessimistic, but some of them are too far-stretching. But as long as the majority of the stories are true, then I would say it's a fun book. And, again, overall, I just had a fun time reading it. If you're considering reading this book, I'd suggest being over the age of 18 just because it deals with gambling. But if you are and you're just interested in the gambling world, I recommend it for anyone that just wants a fun read. You just read about his life and how crazy he was, and just some of the things. It's not too long to read. I think the audio is 8 or 9 hours. So it's a very fun read. And I'd say if you go into it, just go in with an open mind and hope that the majority of the stories are true. But if you guys have any comments or questions, post it in the comment section below, 'cause I love to hear your comments. If you enjoyed the book review today, hit the subscribe button. I always upload multiple different types of book reviews. But thank you for watching my book review today. This is Mr. V over here. I want you to go enjoy your reading.